Listen, maybe one day we'll capture a fighting machine, eh?
Doing TMOM. Chapter we're on is 16, Into the Cordon. So they were telling Frank that originally the place they would be evacuated to, his medics and co, would be away from the cordon of where the Martians landed. But now, because everything's changed, they're being moved to a place inside the cordon as an evacuation backup spot. And the Martians have created a great circular earthwork from the cylinder bombs they've dropped. They have a line in here that's like, the three of them stood in hot, murky air. So all the smoke from the kind of semi-quasi-nuclear attack has made the air all kind of murky and red and black and smoky everywhere. And it says, some people had tried to sleep in their gas masks. Can you sleep in a gas mask? I'm not sure about that. As far as I know, when you put a gas mask on, you have to intake your breath like with a struggle, and it's quite laboured. Is it actually possible to sleep in a gas mask? Because you're not conscious enough to make the breaths correct. Like draw in extra breath with every inhale. There are aeroplanes flying all above them. I like to think these are kind of biplanes, but maybe they're like a steampunk adapted biplane from an alternate future. They're saying Frank's showered, so they've obviously they've reset up their medical field base to the standard where they can take showers. So they've got a little field hospital set up, judging by this. Daylight kind of looks like nighttime a little bit because of all the black smoke everywhere. I should clarify, when I say the black smoke, I don't mean the black smoke, because the black smoke is the chemical weapon the Martians use, but some black smoke. So the planes above them have taken aerial photos of the ring of craters and earthworks caused by the cylinders, and they've managed to send them down to them, because Fairfield on the ground has got some to show to Frank. They had to kind of stitch the photos together like you would have done of trenches in World War I to get a big overall picture. Or like when you used to, like in the early days when they took photos of the moon and stuff, I think they stitched photos together because they only took a narrow photo when they got close with the spacecraft and orbited like and then they stitched them together in post-production. Each crater is a mile wide. At the centre of the circle there's a smudge, which is Amersham. Or I don't know how you pronounce it, immersion. So everyone's like assuming, they've cottoned onto the fact that the second wave of cylinders at land will be the ones containing the fighting machines. They're all kind of estimating where the next cylinders will come down, but they're not really sure. They say some will come down in the cordon and some will come down in existing pits. They don't say how they arrived at this conclusion. So Verity's like, why would they land in ground they've churned up? And Fairfield assumes that they won't meet any the Martians think they won't meet any resistance when they land, because they've done kind of a shock and awe campaign by bombing the heck out of the ground. So they think they'll be able to land in peace and unscrew their cylinder and take the time to get their Martian fighting machines out of the cylinder, which turns out differently later on. So I don't know if that's Fairfield's idea, but maybe he's got orders from command that they're all beginning to advance inland, and that's why they've set up this medical hospital more inside the cordon rather than away from it, because they're going to take some troops in, because the Martians haven't done the job of killing everyone. They've killed half the British army, which is pretty significant, but they haven't killed tons of them, and there's still a chance for them, the humans think, to bring in their troops to where the cylinders will land in their prediction and hit them with the surviving troops and bring guns up on railways and things. So they've set up this field hospital, and they've already been told to tear it down, and they're going to be walking across the landscape, and there's scouts and sappers up ahead of them, checking out the coast is clear, and all the nurses are going to be like walking through the landscapes, and they've put all their hospital gear in horse-drawn carts and also motor wagons, which I assume means cars of this day, like a World War One era car, you know, those armoured cars. But he says other people, you know, they got it easy because other people have to somehow drag artillery pieces and giant weapons with them behind them. Or is it in front? Probably in front of them. In the early afternoon, the column of military makes its way past the ruins of Uxbridge that I think they were watching the previous night burning. They're making their way northwest past it, and there seem to be horses, people marching on foot, vehicles. Scouts are still on motorcycles. Those were pretty cool. They seem pretty heroic in this. Like, I think gas mask scouts on little black motorcycle and sidecar zooming back and forth. There's an interesting bit here where there's like an artificial kind of mountain thing. There's like a ridge that they're climbing across, and it's where the column is passing where two Martian craters abut each other side by side. So they're kind of, it's like a soily striding edge made out of destroyed English landscape. It says some of the ground exposed by the crater is like bone coloured because it's all natural chalk and clay underground. In the muddier areas, it seems like the troops are laying planks down for the vehicles to go over, which is another little nod to World War One kind of fighting. You can imagine such sights, remembering photos of Passchendaele and stuff. So then they come to a place called Denham, where there's a flood. There was something called the Grand Union Canal, which had been disrupted by the Martians' cylinder bombing, and it's just flooded out into the countryside. So they've created a pontoon bridge for vehicles to go over or be dragged over, but the people on foot have to walk through this mess, get stuck in quicksand and stuff on the muddy soil. So more Passchendaele imagery there, although without the bare tree trunks and stuff. And they come out of this swamp looking like mudmen with like lumps of clay and mud attached to them. While walking out of the mud, Frank encounters a German guy in an overturned cart, and his machine gun's fallen into the mud, and he's like, "We have to get out of the mud, we have to clean it, because we have an engagement to meet the Martians." And he names himself as Heiko Schwezig. His rank is Feldwebel-Lieutenant. I don't know, something German. On a detachment from the Imperial German Army. The gun he's carrying is called a G8 machine gun. I don't know if that's probably made up, I imagine. Or is it? He said he was like guarding the German embassy, and he just has this special German machine gun weapon, so because he thinks the Martians are now not just declaring war on England, they're declaring war on the entire planet, he decided to just bring his special gun and try and get it to the Martians. It seems a big fat woman with a tractor has come out to meet them and is called Mildred Tritton, and she's gonna drag the machine gun out of the mud with a tractor. It says they're now arriving at their final position, and the troops ahead of them have already dug up trenches, and they're digging in and setting up latrine ditches, which I guess are the toilet trench, building parapets with sandbags. They've somehow got to an area that looks like unsullied British countryside between the cylinders. I don't know how they managed that. I thought it was all destruction here. Green hills and hamlets and herons and cattle. It's still mid-afternoon and they've only travelled a few miles. They're all exhausted, but they're put to work. Again, they say at midnight the next round of cylinders are coming. They've been briefed on the black smoke, so obviously they all have gas masks in the event that the Martians use that. They position the field hospital, obviously, back from the frontline troops' trenches, but they've got their own trenches. The cylinder that's coming down they've marked as number 12 cylinder, and it's coming down very close to them. They've surrounded where they think it's going to come down. They say here, and I'm not sure if this is canonical as far as the old book is concerned, but they say the heat ray of the last war has a useful range of several miles. I'm not sure whether that's true. It didn't seem like the heat ray was ever shooting like miles and miles ahead of itself. It was, I mean, the Martians are quite high up on their stilts, so it was mainly pointing diagonal downward. So there's never really been any use for it to fire miles ahead. I suppose because of the height of the Martian, the distance of that heat ray, if it is true, would be like extended way ahead of that. Because if you're shooting miles and miles from the level of the ground, that's one thing. But if you're shooting miles and miles from an elevated position, you're shooting a longer distance practically. So as a result, that's why they're setting up trenches. Apparently, I don't think they've quite thought it through. But they're saying they're setting up trenches because of the heat ray, and the heat ray having several miles reach. I suppose the further the heat ray shoots, the more it shoots like that level. But most of the time they're shooting the heat rays like that, which is no good for a trench if the Martian's above you, which is normally where it's firing from. You have to dig a hell of a deep trench to avoid that kind of angle of ray coming down at you. So apparently they're now all entrenched, and the clock is slowly ticking its way to midnight, and everyone's like going to the toilet, like all together at the same time. So it's getting busier. Like the 11 o'clock toilet break is really crowded because everyone's like shitting themselves basically. Mounting anxiety, it says here. And again he hides behind a sandbag parapet to view the direction where the cylinder's meant to come. And Frank's sort of thinking he might die here, and that after midnight either he'll get killed in the blast of another cylinder crashing down, or he's going to have a hard time imagining a future beyond the midnight. Alright, and Frank finds out that the artilleryman's in the trench with him all of a sudden, right at the end of the chapter here. He's like looking at some veins of chalk in the trench that they've dug, and behind him's like, "Chalk country, Doc." He's like, "Bert Cook." He's wearing a reservist's uniform. I don't know what that is. And it might be something completely different in this universe to a World War One variation. With a steel helmet and a blackened face. Like burnt, like charcoal kind of rubbed over his face. Yeah, and they keep giving the artilleryman a small line that appeared in the original War of the Worlds book. And he goes like, "Oh, Bert, I suppose you had to be here." And he's like, "As a sparrow goes for man." So yeah, that's a line from the original War of the Worlds. And so the reason the artilleryman's here is not what any of the other people in the trenches are there for. He is more calculating. He is one of the main characters of the War of the Worlds series, if not the main character. He's kind of more of the main character than the journalist in a lot of ways, because he's always got a plan for how to deal with the Martians, and he knows that the Martians are hyper-intelligent, walking bits of brain, and his solution, I think, is to outthink them, basically. And he does succeed in outthinking them in both books in a lot of ways, I think. With the underground cities idea in the first book, although the journalist thinks he's lazy and doesn't do enough of the work. And in this book he succeeds in quite a big way. I quite like the artilleryman's arc in this book. I like the way that he's outthinking the Martians and doing all these things to kind of strategize and make tactics against them. So he's in the trench with completely different ideas from the rest of them. He's coming directly to where the Martians will land with an idea in mind. He says, "Since the beggars died off in 07, that's fictional revisionism bullshit. It's not 07, it's 1898. He's been waiting for them to come finish the job they started." So he's anticipating them coming, and he's got plans for the Martians. And then it ends the chapter with him going, I've got a riddle for you. What's green and flashing and flies like a bird in the sky? And he points upwards. Fucking traffic, dude. That's the end of that chapter. We're reading from chapter 17, cylinder number 12. So at midnight, as they're expecting, cylinder number 12, that they've named with a flash of green, as is normal for the cylinders, crashes into the ground. This time not as hard as the dummy cylinder bombs they dropped, but like a standard cylinder landing, which is still pretty devastating. It causes its own massive crater that it sinks into. So it's still pretty harsh. And they describe there being a gust of air that knocked the breath out of people's chests, and sandbags collapsing, but not as strong as the previous cylinder. And so the cylinder has landed now, the first cylinder of the Martian invasion, and someone's yelling, "Bring those bloody guns up!" So they see it, and they're starting already to attack the thing. They're bringing up the artillery. There's already huge artillery firing that says there's 18 and 60 pounders. 60 pounder guns. That sounds like a very large artillery piece, firing in the distance from behind the lines. And they plan that the shells are going to hit the cylinder before the troops even get there. Schwezig, the new German guy, brings up his machine gun in a hurry. So Schwezig is in a position to see more than Frank sees of the cylinder, because he's going into the pit, and he tells him later what he sees. So it's Frank's account being read by Miss Elphinston, or being included by Miss Elphinston in her overall account. But it's Frank's diary that survives, so it's not necessarily clear that Frank survives at first. So they find that the cylinder this time is embedded in the ground vertically. So that's an interesting one. I'm not sure if it's described in H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds how the cylinders land or how they're positioned when they're in the earth. I can't quite remember that. But in all the paintings from the musical, the cylinder is like diagonal. It's not upright. So this cylinder has come down upright. They're describing it as 30 yards across and 100 yards long. So he wants to define its dimensions in this. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Doesn't leave much to the reader's imagination, and I'm sure if I saw the dimensions he's made the cylinder, I probably would estimate it as I'd probably want it to look a different size. So apparently the G8 machine gun is for if there's a chance that the Martians or anything survives the artillery blast that's coming down onto it. So the machine gun is to kind of mop up. But everything in this, and I quite like how they do this, but it's really well done, happens differently from the original War of the Worlds book, because they have advanced their technology. Like I say, this book, a lot of it is bad, but there are quite a few good ideas in it. If I could, I'd like have the book rewritten to just remove all the bad ideas and include the good ideas that Baxter came up with, and just not have any revisionist dates and things. But yeah, this is the way the Martians come out of the new cylinders. There's a crack and a flash of green light. Schwezig's watching this. A band of light around the top seam of the cylinder under its flat lid. It's saying there's a flat lid. I would define that completely differently. The lid, I would define it as the lid in the Jeff Wayne musical paintings. So the cylinder isn't actually an exact cylinder. It's kind of a lemon shape, like the bottom might be a cylinder or the whole thing might be a lemon shape, but it's just called a cylinder. It's not actually a cylinder. Or if it's a cylinder with fat, kind of rounded edges. They're saying they think the lid is perhaps weighing 5,000 tons. I'm not sure how heavy that is. I can't imagine it. What's 5,000 tons in real life? it was suddenly detached and cast aside like a straw boater, I'm sure that's some Victorian term, to fly across the pit. So I guess it's kind of when someone blows up a tank and the top turret like flies off into the sky and hits the ground, which can sometimes happen. No hours of patient unscrewing this time. In an instant, a metal tentacle comes out, so that could be part of the handling machine, or it could be the undercarriage of a fighting machine. Lifted out of the craft, bearing a compact device. This is the early heat ray generator that we saw at the start when the Martians get out with it. Fezzik hurled himself flat into the dirt. A ghost pale beam of light passed over his body while he's lying down, kind of like what happened to the artilleryman. So he's taken the place of the artilleryman from the first book. The men who are still standing, because he's gone prone, his unit who are standing burst into white flame. So they're describing the heat ray fairly correctly. The ray swept around like a hose at the perimeter of the pit. So I read this differently the first time. I read this. It's gonna aim for the artillery basically, and everything's gonna happen at once. But I didn't remember this detail of the heat ray firing around the edge of the pit in seconds. It says Fairfield could not see the heat beam itself. Well, it's meant to be invisible, at least at first. I'd say that the stronger one, because you try and compromise between the book and the Jeff Wayne musical version. The Jeff Wayne musical version, in the paintings you can see the heat ray, and in the book it's defined, at least at the start in the pit, as being an invisible ray of heat. I would say it's both, and it's the invisible ray of heat when it's in the pit, and the strange box and the whizzing mirror and all these things. And then later on they refine it, and it's this elongated gun thing, and the heat ray is like visible. It's kind of like a yellow-orange, not a beam, but a very compacted flamethrower, so it looks like a beam until it arrives on the spot, but it's more powerful than it was at the pit. Fairfield seeing men, machines, vehicles and horses incinerated in a glare of light all around the pit. He saw more beams, so now he can see something. He can see beams reaching into the sky. This might be the searchlight thing the Martians have. Beams visible in air that was filling with smoke. Yeah, I think it's their searchlight. He looked up and saw detonations high in the air, almost like fireworks. These are artillery shells incoming, coming to smash the Martian cylinder. None of the shells reached the ground or its target. Spotter planes that are flying over. Biplanes are also going up in flame. That's an interesting detail that I forgot. Fairfield looks back to the pit, and then he sees the cowl. He sees the fighting machine's hood, its head, coming out, lifting smoothly on 3 unfolding legs, rising out of the smoke. See, so this is what I pictured, The fighting machine. I can't remember that first bit where the heat ray pops out of the pit and goes. He's described it as like firing, coming out of the cylinder, then firing in a kind of circle as it comes out to shoot the edge of the crater of the cylinder. And then the bit that I do remember is this bit I've described. So the heat ray turns upward and fires on all the artillery that's coming down as it's coming down. So the humans have already fired, but the heat ray is being used as like anti-air or like anti-missile technology, anti-ICBM sort of thing, and going, and it's firing these artillery shells as the fighting machine's coming up. So I imagine the Martian fighting machine is looking up of this vertical cylinder, and the legs unfolding is a cool detail too. So it's like it comes directly out, it's building itself out of the pit immediately and firing upwards as it goes, and then it's just kind of standing in the cylinder, and then it steps out of the cylinder, which that is very that thank you, Baxter, you've done something cool there. You've done a couple of cool things up to now. A few, there was bits here and there, but most of it has been kind of trashy and crappy, and there's been a lot of political bullshit in there. There's a couple of things like this. There's a few moments that are are worth reading this book for, and this is one of them. Another one is the Martian experiments later on. Another one is the Artilleryman, his entire arc. A reason why the book is definitely bad is the religious Chewbacca creatures from Venus that are slightly sexual with the main character. That's bizarre. I don't know I'll have to reread it, but the first time I read it, it was like they're carrying her through an underwater swamp in like an embrace. And I think she says something to the effect of she likes it, or I don't know. So this describes the first aspect of the arms race. The Martians have realised what they did wrong the first time, and they've changed the circumstances of their tactics upon arrival to the humans, so that the humans have like no high ground. And they've also kind of anticipated what the humans would do this time as well. Verity Bliss is too far back to see anything. In the medic's trench, the great cowl of the first fighting machine is already advancing, looming out of the pit. Verity drags Frank out of the trench like, oh, Whammon saves the day. That's fine. It's just, it seems definitely like something Baxter would do. If you've read his fucking... the stuff he did in when he worked with Arthur C. Clarke on the Time Odyssey. I can't tell which bits Clarke wrote and which bits Baxter wrote. I can tell a lot of the feminist bullshit is what Baxter wrote, because I've read Clarke on his own before, not co-writing, and he doesn't write stuff like that. So that's Baxter, trying to be progressive. Verity's like, we must run, it's the only chance. Frank's like hearing the screams of the newly wounded, and he's expecting that he should go over the top of the trench into the pit and start grabbing people to save their lives and stuff, but Verity's like, no, we're under ridiculous attack, we will not survive, let's bugger off entirely. So they're just like completely the medics who are meant to be saving everyone, obviously they've just decided to completely evacuate to save their own lives, which is, I don't know who's right there, Verity or Frank. Frank's the sacrificial one. Verity's like, if we save our own lives, we'll be in a better position to save other lives, which also has merit. They round up the nurses. They start running away from the pit, which apparently is deeper into the Martian cordon. So away from the cylinder number 12 pit is actually more towards the centre, where there are more Martian cylinders, like not towards the escape zone or whatever, the safe zone or whatever outside the Martian earthworks. Lots of men with guns and soldiers are running the opposite way from them, like being sacrificial, running directly towards the Martians with their weapons. They're firing at the fighting machine with their rifles. Not gonna work. He looks over his shoulder, the Martians advancing remorselessly, he says, into the fire, as in into the gunfire. They're describing this the H.G. Wells book way, which I guess you would, wouldn't you? But when you describe it, so it's described as the Martian fighting machine is moving like a milking stool, tipped over and bowling along end over end on at a tremendous speed, which is how H.G. Wells described it, and it's something I can imagine. You got a three-legged stool thing with a flat, you know, the circular ones with the flat top, and you just grab it and spin it so it bowls across your garden or whatever. And for a while it's like it's walking, but it's rotating as it walks. So it fits a completely different art style to the Jeff Wayne version to describe it that way. That's the only problem with that, is you can't easily draw a compromise with that description of how the fighting machines move between that and the Jeff Wayne version, which can't rotate as it moves, it has to move forward. So that's like a line in the book that lends credence to some of the other art that's been done of the Martians over the years on the book covers. If you look at the book covers of War of the Worlds, Cat, as I've said, there's a lot of different art in War of the Worlds book covers. in different releases. He says he has a traumatic memory of seeing the Martians before, Frank, journalist's brother, but I'm not sure, I can't remember in War of the Worlds 1 if Frank actually directly saw the Martians. I know he was running away from basically like hearsay and rumours and tons of scared people who had seen the Martians and getting caught up in swarms of evacuees. But I can't remember a direct description of him having seen the Martians, but maybe he like sees them off camera, so to speak. So the artilleryman forces Frank down into the ground and Verity to duck in the spot where they are. It's like, down you fools! And they're doing the Jurassic Park T-Rex thing where they're like ducking and staying still and lying face down, I suppose a bit like dead people, to let the fighting machines pass over them. It's obviously killing all the moving soldiers and stuff. Although the Martians are hyper intelligent, I don't think it'd act like the T-Rex. I think it would know that some of the people are playing dead if it stuck around. It's just at this point it's too distracted by the soldiers that are a threat to it. So an immense leg swings by them. The cowl is like twisting like a head. I like that. It kind of described in War of the Worlds 1 as looking around and having intelligence in the machine body. It's like looking around at things. So it's got that kind of curiosity. These ones are, even though they're fighting machines and not handling machines, they have metallic nets on their back. So these are like adapted fighting machines with handling machine features. So if I was going to draw them, I'd draw them differently. I'd probably try and keep them mostly the same, else you're kind of ruining the familiarity for the audience, but putting the net on the back is like hybridizing the fighting machine with the handling machine, which is kind of cool. And there's probably room for a net on the back, and you wouldn't see it much if you were seeing the fighting machine from the front. It probably wouldn't be too distracting. The net is obviously for catching humans as stocks of intravenous food material. In which case, if it has the net, it probably has claws. It has the pincers. So I would say that they can fold away, so you wouldn't always see them. They're probably deployable on these ones, which, you know, again, if I was doing a version of War of the Worlds that blended H.G. Wells' version with Jeff Wayne's version, which I really wanted to do for a long portion of my life, but I don't think I will be able to. I'd have in the first book, I'd have the ones that the artilleryman meets that are only described by him to the journalist. We don't actually see the encounter necessarily with the artilleryman, we just hear it from him. I'd have those just semi-built fighting machines, and I'd probably put the claws on them so that they can, because it says picking up men and bashing them into trees is the line in the musical. The main fighting machines in the paintings of the musical don't have any claws or anything to pick up men with, and they're not handling machines. So I would say they're shorter, they haven't got their long legs on yet because they're still being built. Or maybe they're the youngsters because they're young Martians, so maybe they have smaller fighting machines for the young Martians. So they'd be wandering through the woods bashing men against trees, so they probably have claws on them, and they're probably not got their full length legs on them, so they're shorter. So that's kind of similar to this, I think. They haven't described the claws, but I think because they have the basket, they probably have the claws, because it's like one goes with the other. So the heat rays splashing all over the place, but it hasn't actually come close to the three of them, all kind of lying down in the mud. So they're lucky, I would say. So the artilleryman saved them, basically, kind of in a flukish way. So Bert Cook, the artilleryman, is saying, "Can you see the pattern?" to Frank. They're going for the equipment, guns and ammo, and the men who fight back. But if you submit, they're leaving us alive. Yeah, so they are assuming, and I believe too, that the Martians know that they're down there. The Martians know that they're playing dead. They know that they're ducking. They're simply ignoring them. So it's not that the Martians can't see them and that they're being super clever, like in Jurassic Park T-Rex way, by hiding. Stay still. Its vision acuity is based on movement, or they can't see us here. It's that the Martians definitely do see them, and they're ignoring them. So it's kind of like Predator. If you won't fight it back, then it doesn't give a shit. What you want to challenge. It's not quite like Predator, but it's sort of in that area. You say wheelhouse? In the wheelhouse. Yeah, they're leaving us alive, Verity said. Artilleryman assumes they're not using the black smoke on the ones who don't fight because they're going to pick them up and put them in a basket later for food. Harvesting, they say. And Artilleryman's like, do you know why? Because we're defeated already. And the second machine comes out of the pit just as the chapter is ending. And then a third fighting machine comes out and a fourth, rising gracefully from the pit. And this is Artilleryman goes, this is the life, this is the life. And the chapter ends. That's that's a good chapter, I would say. That's pretty much very well done. Would keep Baxter. Reading from chapter 18, The Flying Machine Over London. We're beginning the chapter with the narrator saying I, so we're back with Miss Elphinston, I believe. She says she's now gone to the West End by the time the second batch of Martians were due. I think she's assuming that the first cylinders coming down were actually Martians and not a bombing run, because she's not over there. So she assumes the Martians are already here, basically. She hears troop carriers leaving Charing Cross Station. There are still gas lamps, but there's a mixture of gas and electric lamps here. And Miss Elphinston sees green flashes off to the northwest of her position in the sky. She assumes right on top of where her ex-husband is. She hears a small barrage of artillery, flashes and flickers of white light, as if large explosions going off outside London, and then it ends and she hears nothing more of it. She goes back to her hotel and again just takes sandwiches and hot toddy and snacks to her hotel room, so she's still there. Then, in spite of the Martians, she sleeps until dawn. It's a Tuesday now in March, apparently a clear day, and she leaves the hotel for a final time. She walks to the Thames and she sees torpedo rams, basically like ironclad dreadnoughts like the Thunderchild, hanging around in the river, and gun platform boats. Also a lot of civilian ships clogging up the river. They're all going downstream towards the sea, away from the fighting. And then she sees that the Martian flying machine is up. It's already up, so that's pretty fast. They got about 5 fighting machines out of a cylinder in one go last chapter, and now they've already got the flying machine out and built it up. And it existed in the first War of the Worlds book, but it was actually flying. I think it was flying during the Thunderchild fight, dropping some black smoke. Yeah, it did actually fly in that book, come to think of it. No one got a clear glimpse of it until the journalist found it at the pit in Primrose Hill. So I picture it as kind of like the fighting machines, but with big kind of bat wings, kind of like the Batwing from Batman sort of thing. You know, large, broad, do they call them delta wings? No, that's swept back wings. Well, large, broad wings anyway, attached to like a fighting machine where a Martian sits. Kind of like a boomerang. She sees it in the corner of her eye as a glint in the sky to the west. She says she saw a disc, flat and wide, a smooth profile, very large, moving very rapidly. So she's seeing it kind of like a flying saucer thing. I don't know if I agree with that. Maybe they go into more detail about what they want it to look like in this book later. It rose up beyond the clouds. So she's saying that, like Carrie escaping on the steamer during Thunderchild in the first book, that she, with Frank and the weaker girl who she's calling Alice, who used to be her in that book, escaped on a paddle steamer in quite the same way as Carrie did, and she glimpsed it back then going across the sky. She's saying it moves smoothly and silently with grace, like it belongs in the clouds. So she was saying, of all the gadgets that humans retrieved from the Martians after the first Martian War, the flying machine was the first they made operational. So I haven't heard about this much in the book so far. Have they got their own fighting machines operational? I don't know if that's I don't think that happens in this book. But they're making it out like they made the flying machine operational. I wonder if they got to use any of the Martian machines. They obviously got to use the handling machine that did the smelting and mining, because they're producing Martian aluminium to make Bentleys and things. She's describing it as a scramjet in the way it functions. So it doesn't drag its way through the air with propeller blades, it sucks air and explosively fires it out the back. Super combustion ramjet. It's a thing that works in our world that humans have built, like NASA and all that. But it's not, there haven't been many of them made. They're saying the Martian flying machines are adapted to the conditions of Mars's air, which is much thinner than Earth's. She's now saying they would streamline a Martian flying machine like a Stingray to fly in Mars's atmosphere. I'm not quite sure how that would work. She's assuming that the first Martian flying machine had to be built up slowly from parts in several cylinders, but she's seeing by how quickly this one is in the air that it was probably launched directly out of a cylinder, so I think it's probably something I'd imagine to be larger than 2 cylinders. So maybe it folds or something and then it unfolds coming out. So yeah, I'm kind of glad they didn't do a scene where that was emerging from the cylinder, because I think it would look goofy. She said the flying machine came from the west and was heading for her position. She remembered that the first flying machine dropped black smoke as it went. The machine passes directly over Miss Elphinstone. And she doesn't seem panicked. So she's describing it because it's passing closer. She's saying the hull was brazen like the cowl of a fighting machine. Yeah, I agree there should be kind of a fighting machine in there. Its undersurface was grooved. Yeah. Perhaps for stability in the air. And its sharp rim was oddly feathered at the back. Yeah, but Baxter was describing it as like a disc, which I don't really agree with. I saw now that the flying machine had escorts, biplanes, 2 of them, which swooped and darted like flies beneath the belly of the behemoth. German design, or possibly Russian? Not British. She's saying the invaders did not have the skies entirely to themselves. So that is a Martian flying machine. It's not one that the humans have put up from after the First War. It's just being pursued by some German, I assume, biplanes. The newspaper boys on the street start calling with the newest papers. All the crowd around them trying to get a newspaper. Headlines: explosions in Middlesex, more Martians land, brief battle waged, fresh catastrophe feared. And also Marvin's government loudhailer vans are coming down the street also. And they're slapping posters on the lampposts saying, "Londoner, save your city, go to the King's Line." I assume the King's Line is like the front line. And they're trying to draft people, or they're trying to encourage people. I don't know if it's a draft. Maybe it is a draft. They're saying able-bodied men between 16 and 60 should grab a pick and shovel. So not weapons. And they're doing some kind of digging earthworks to stop the Martians. They include a map of the King's Line, which is a defensive perimeter cutting across the countries between where the Martians land and London. So they've got a big kind of like, I don't know if it's like a Hindenburg line, but they've got a big earthwork line that they're building that is like a defensive thing to prevent the Martians getting to London somehow. She's saying the line runs from Ashford northeast through Twickenham and Richmond, roughly north through Brentford, Ealing and Wembley to Hendon, and then northwest to Edgware, its terminus ending at Stanmore, or close to Stanmore, where his sister-in-law probably is. Tractors and digging machines are going there. There's trenches, earthworks, pillboxes and readouts. Artillery batteries reinforced by naval guns. German detachments and reinforcements are coming from across the Channel from German-occupied France. There are lots of little geographical details here. I like these. You could almost look at a map while reading these books and just kind of follow what is where and when it's happening, and it's kind of cool. So she meets an old woman by the posters that she's reading about the King's Line, and she says, "Oh, my husband fought in the Boer War, you know." The Boer War was a war that actually went on around the time, maybe just before War of the Worlds is set. It's like 1898 War of the Worlds is meant to be set. Boer War was around that period, I think a little earlier, in Africa, Transvaal, which I worked into my kind of student film that's based on War of the Worlds. And she's saying that the Boers, resisted the British like this with the trenches and stuff when her husband fought in the war, and now they're taking the place of the Boers by creating these trenches and things, while the Martians, I suppose, are taking the place of the British. So it's kind of like reversed roles. And she said the Boers put up a good fight and the defences were good, but eventually they did fall. All they do is Baxter's inserting some feminism. The Boers put up a good fight even so. That they did, but this defence line, she snorted, able-bodied men indeed. No women, you mean? Why are you inserting this stuff, Baxter? People don't think this about women. Shut the fuck up. Main character's like bigging herself up here. She's like, Julie Elphinstone, war correspondent. Arrogant. And she's wondering if she should go to Alice, who is at the end of King's Line. She reckons the fighting might be harsher there because the Martians will try and turn the British and German flank at the end of the line. So she's contemplating going over to meet Alice at that area. The newsboys now bring new news from planes flying over Middlesex, but the fighting machines are already on the move now. We're doing chapter 19 now, the first hours within the cordon. So in the first hours of Tuesday, Frank and Verity, with a bunch of troops who have lost their units, are all hiding in foxholes and trenches. They're all sitting there in the hole, kind of watching the Martians walking around the cordon. They're kind of lifting up destroyed artillery and wreckage and stuff. The Martians know they're there, they're just kind of ignoring them. It's the early hours of Tuesday, so it's actually, we're in the dark night bit of Tuesday, not the daylight where Miss Elphinstone was on the Tuesday. So I think we've gone back in time to get to this bit. This is the bit where Miss Elphinstone was asleep in the hotel. Because it's so dark, they can't fully see the fighting machines. They're just kind of working out where the fighting machines are via the light of burning vehicles as the legs pass. Every now and then a searchlight hits the Martians and illuminates them, and whoever turns on the searchlight just gets incinerated. Nice job. No one seems to be resisting or fighting the Martians now, or trying to fight them. Verity's saying anything mechanical that moves, the heat ray hits them, even if it isn't a weapon or a gun or anything. Verity's saying, where is Cook? Apparently the artilleryman's run off somewhere now, and he's looking for Martians on his own agenda. They're worried in the trench because it's starting to get light with dawn. So Verity hears something, so she peeks out the top of the trench, and a fighting machine is coming. It's like gracefully legging its way across the landscape, but right by its feet is a handling machine, it looks like. Fat body on multiple legs like a crab or spider, the size of a small motor car. And they say it's a handling machine. I would actually do the handling machine larger, as it seems in the musical Jeff Wayne version. But they've done it smaller in this, which goes a bit more like the book version. She says it's odd to see one outside of a museum. They think because it's a builder that maybe it's going to build a fortress or something. They muse that the cordon that the humans have created has now become the Martians' base, essentially. So it's kind of the Martians' cordon now. The chubby farmer woman Mildred Tritton turns up in the trench. So apparently the Martians don't fire on wagons pulled by horses. They only fire on mechanical stuff, or I suppose horses that are dragging howitzers. So for instance, they blew up her tractor. She says she has a farm at Abbotsdale and she's been picking up people, survivors from the cordon, and taking them home, which is her home. She says she picked up Fairfield. The Martians are cutting telegraph wires, but there are wireless telegraphs still in use. And it seems they're lucky she's here because she picked up Fairfield, and Fairfield took a shine to Dr. Frank Jenkins, i.e. journalist brother, and after they had that conversation in the command tent. So Fairfield has sent Mildred Tritton in the horse and cart to pick up him and the nurses. She's saying the Martian black smoke can do bad things to the soil, so it's terrible for farmers. People can't drink from streams. They're happy that Mildred has turned up for them. And now we're on chapter 20, An Occupied Countryside. They eat food and Mildred gets going with the horse and cart. It feels very strange to him to be out of cover. It seems very counterintuitive because the Martians are moving about all above them, but they will not shoot the horse and cart, so that's why they're just kind of even more visible to the Martians now. Mildred has read the journalist's book and is interested that Frank is his brother. Frank's a bit jealous, to tell her. So now the darkness has turned into twilight with dawn. There's a bit of light on the horizon and they can see some fighting machines in the distance ahead in the mist. Mildred's saying she doesn't want to use the roads because the Martians are everywhere. I don't get that because they're not shooting her, but she can see a couple of them, and apparently they're cutting the roads and the rail lines. Okay, they're cutting the roads. Somehow they're damaging the roads so that vehicles can't go on them. So she's trying to keep out of the way of them as much as she can. So they're going off-road on the bumpy route. It's the Chiltern Hills, apparently. She says she's going to drop off his troops in Abbotsdale and take him to the manor, a house where Fairfield and a bunch of surviving senior officers are gathered. Frank's mentioning that everything seems a bit medieval, as they're crossing countryside in a horse and cart over muddy fields, and they're like a bit kind of technology-less, and they're going to meet in a house where their seniors are, and there's the local Bobby and the postmaster and the bank manager gathered at the house, who are guests of the local elite lady of the manor. Mildred is remarking that they were expecting not to be in a siege where they were going to be running out of food, but this is what this is becoming. They're expecting a short attack campaign on the cylinders and to win, so they haven't planned for the long term. Mildred's going to get them ploughing her fields of her farm to get food grown. All the straggling military people they can rescue from the cordon. She says they can't use tractors to plough the fields, so again, kind of medieval, because the Martians will just heat ray them, so they've got to use horses and like do it by hand and stuff. They're saying they'll probably have trouble running out of water unless they open up old wells in Abbotsdale, because most of the other water might be poisoned if they drop black smoke on it. They've apparently reached green countryside now, so Frank has a sense of unreality, like everything seems normal at this particular patch they've reached. And Frank starts crying and all the women go over and friggin' hug him. I don't know why they've put that in. I don't think the Conservatives will be pleased at that section. And like Verity and Mildred are all like running over to hug him and cuddle him and stuff. What the hell? Anyway, that's how that chapter ends.
Give me a handful of men. We'll start all over